Imagine this. You're rushing through a storm, focused on getting home to your kid, when you see someone collapse right in front of you. Everyone else keeps walking, pretending they didn't see anything. But you stop. You kneel in the rain and save a stranger's life, not knowing that this one moment will completely change everything you thought was possible for your future. Rain hammered down mercilessly on the supermart parking lot. An elderly man in an expensive coat suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed near the shopping cart return, his groceries scattering across the wet asphalt. Shoppers hurried past with umbrellas, avoiding eye contact, more concerned about staying dry than helping someone in distress. Only one person stopped. Andrew Martin was 32 years old, a single father working 2 jobs to support his 8-year-old son, Benjamin. He wore a faded work jacket and carried a small backpack, having just finished his shift at the warehouse, before picking up groceries with his carefully planned budget. When he saw the elderly man go down, Andrew didn't hesitate. He dropped his shopping bag and knelt beside the stranger, rain soaking through his thin jacket. The man's breathing was shallow and irregular, his face pale with the gray pallor that Andrew recognized from the CPR training he'd received at work. Without thinking, he positioned his hands on the man's chest and began compressions. "Stay with me, sir," Andrew said, counting aloud. "Help is coming." After what felt like forever, but was probably less than 2 minutes, the elderly man coughed and his eyes fluttered open. Andrew continued monitoring his pulse until the paramedics arrived and took over his care. As they loaded the man into the ambulance, he gripped Andrew's arm weakly. "What's your name, son? I need to know who saved my life." "Andrew Martin," he replied simply. "Just glad you're okay." What Andrew didn't know was that the man he'd saved was Professor Henry Walker, one of the wealthiest and most respected academics in the state. Professor Walker had spent 40 years teaching engineering at the university and had established scholarship funds worth millions of dollars.
Andrew returned home to their small apartment where Benjamin was waiting, homework spread across their kitchen table. The boy looked up as his father entered, soaking wet but trying to act like nothing unusual had happened. "Dad, you're all wet. What happened?" Benjamin asked with the perceptive concern that children show when they sense something important. "I helped someone who was sick, buddy," Andrew replied carefully, not wanting to worry his son with details about medical emergencies. "It reminded me of things I learned in school before you were born." Benjamin nodded seriously, then asked the question that went straight to Andrew's heart. "Do you ever miss being in school, Dad? Learning about building things?" Andrew paused, struck by how his son had intuited something he'd been trying not to think about for years. Few people knew that Andrew had once been a promising engineering student, completing 3 years with excellent grades and genuine enthusiasm for mechanical design. But when his wife Sarah died in a car accident, Andrew's world had collapsed. Faced with caring for 2-year-old Benjamin alone, he dropped out of school and taken whatever jobs he could find. "I was never actually an engineer, sweetheart," Andrew said, settling beside his son. "I just studied it for a while. But yes, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if things had been different." That evening, after Benjamin had gone to bed, Andrew found himself researching cardiac emergency response online, comparing what he remembered from his training with current best practices. The experience had awakened something he'd buried under years of financial stress and single-parenting responsibilities. Meanwhile, Professor Walker was recovering in the hospital's cardiac unit, asking every nurse and doctor about the young man who had saved his life. When he learned Andrew's name and background, Professor Walker immediately contacted his attorney. "I want to find out everything about Andrew Martin, not because I'm suspicious, but because I want to thank him properly. And I suspect there's more to his story than just being a good Samaritan." The investigation revealed everything: Andrew's interrupted education, his excellent academic record, his sacrifice of personal dreams to provide for Benjamin, and his current struggle working 2 jobs while raising a son who consistently made honor roll at school.
The invitation arrived as a handwritten letter delivered by courier, requesting Andrew's presence at Professor Walker's estate to discuss matters of mutual interest and gratitude. The formal tone and expensive stationery made Andrew realize that the man he'd helped was significantly wealthier than he'd understood. Andrew arrived at the estate feeling completely overwhelmed by the property's size and elegance. Manicured gardens, imported marble, and a house that probably cost more than he would earn in several lifetimes. Professor Walker greeted him personally, walking with a cane but moving with obvious energy. "You saved my life without needing to know who I was or what I could do for you," Professor Walker said, leading Andrew to a comfortable study lined with books and academic awards. "That kind of character has become increasingly rare in my experience." Andrew felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone should do when someone needs help. I'm glad you're feeling better, but you don't owe me anything." Professor Walker smiled, recognizing the authenticity that had motivated Andrew's life-saving actions. "That response confirms everything I've learned about your character. But I've also learned about your background, your interrupted education, and the sacrifices you've made for Benjamin." Their conversation continued for 3 hours. Professor Walker learned about Benjamin's academic achievements, Andrew's financial struggles, and his lingering regret about abandoning engineering. Andrew learned about Professor Walker's career, his scholarship foundation, and his commitment to helping students whose potential had been limited by circumstances beyond their control. Professor Walker's proposal was carefully crafted to address Andrew's actual needs. The scholarship would fund Andrew's return to engineering school while providing comprehensive support for Benjamin's education and daily needs. The program recognized that Andrew couldn't pursue his dreams without ensuring his son's stability. "I don't want to disrupt Benjamin's routine or your relationship with him," Professor Walker explained, "but I can remove the financial barriers that force you to choose between education and parenting. You could complete your engineering degree while being fully present for Benjamin's childhood." Andrew was speechless. Professor Walker was offering him the opportunity to reclaim the career path that had been interrupted by tragedy and necessity. The scholarship would allow him to pursue his original dreams while maintaining his primary role as Benjamin's father. Professor Walker's offer included provisions that showed his understanding of Andrew's values. The program would allow Andrew to attend classes during Benjamin's school hours, ensuring minimal disruption to their routines while maintaining the stable home environment that Benjamin needed. Benjamin's reaction to learning about the opportunity was pure excitement mixed with mature understanding. "Dad, you always wanted to build things," he said, remembering conversations about Andrew's engineering interests. "I did, buddy. I had to stop studying when your mom died because I needed to focus on taking care of you, but I never stopped thinking about designing things that could help people." Benjamin hugged Andrew fiercely. "I think you'll build the coolest stuff ever," he said with absolute confidence. Andrew began the engineering program, attending morning classes while Benjamin was at school and completing coursework during evening hours. The transition was challenging, but it also reawakened intellectual excitement he'd forgotten was possible. Professor Walker took personal interest in Andrew's progress, attending his design presentations and offering feedback that helped him articulate his engineering concepts with confidence. 6 months into the program, Professor Walker held a press conference to announce his Scholarship Foundation's expansion using Andrew's story as an example. "This isn't about charity. This is about recognizing potential and removing barriers that prevent capable people from contributing their skills to society." 1 year after the parking lot emergency, Andrew was teaching basic engineering principles to first-year students while completing his own accelerated path toward graduation. Benjamin often waited outside the classroom, watching his father demonstrate the problem-solving techniques that had originally motivated his interest in mechanical engineering. After one particularly successful class, Professor Walker approached Andrew with a leather portfolio he'd been carrying for weeks. "I've been thinking about legacy. My wife and I never had children, but watching you balance fatherhood with academic excellence has taught me what it means to build something lasting through relationships rather than achievements."
The portfolio contained legal documents establishing Andrew as the primary beneficiary of Professor Walker's estate, not because of the parking lot rescue, but because of the character, integrity, and commitment he demonstrated over their year of friendship. Benjamin joined them in the empty classroom, displaying the casual familiarity with Professor Walker that indicated their relationship had evolved into something like family. "Can we go to Tony's Pizza? Professor Walker said he's never tried their pepperoni pizza." Their dinner represented the kind of ordinary family moment that Professor Walker had spent decades believing he was too busy to experience. Sitting in a booth with checkered cloth tables, sharing breadsticks, and listening to Benjamin explain his science project, Professor Walker realized his most meaningful legacy would be the relationships he'd built rather than the awards he'd accumulated. The final scene showed the three of them walking home in gentle evening light, Benjamin chattering about summer vacation plans, while Andrew and Professor Walker listened with the attention people give when they understand that ordinary moments are precious. Have you ever helped someone without expecting anything in return? Sometimes the smallest act of kindness opens doors you never knew existed. Like and subscribe to Hidden Hearth if you believe that helping others is the fastest way to help yourself.